Barry Peterson, welcome to the program.
Great to be here with you, Paul. Thanks.
So we're going to talk about the VA a little bit today, but we're going to make a really bold disclaimer up front. That's though you are an employee of the VA, your views today do not represent the views of the Veterans Affairs, Department of Veterans Affairs, your work or anything. This is just two Class of 86 people talking about VA stuff, right?
Thanks, Paul. That's beautiful. Yep.
Department of Veterans Affairs, which in the past I've been calling Veterans Administration. I've been totally
I have
wrong.
too.
I'm learning as I go.
I'm learning as I go too. And one thing I've learned being at the VA, what you thought you knew yesterday is changing tomorrow. It's always changing. So, and I really appreciate the disclaimer, because even if I thought I knew something a year ago, I always have to go back and double check because it's probably changed. The policy.
Right on.
Yeah.
So we'll kick off by saying that our class volunteer veteran services liaison is Scott Womack, who is in charge of, he's our official West Point guy who's in charge of keeping us up to date from a class perspective on the Department of Veterans Affairs. You happen to work talk a little bit about your job at VA, just to give a little background.
Yeah. I love my work at the VA. I've been there for about 8 years now, coming up on my 8-year anniversary. I hired in as what they call an education program specialist. So I hired in as an educator, and about halfway through, about 4 years ago, I was detailed to what started as a temporary assignment in a field, innovations, and that's turned into my permanent job. So about 4 years in education, about 4 years in innovation. And the 4 years in innovation is really focused on virtual reality and extended reality and how we can use it to enhance care for veterans and enhance engagement for employees.
When I used to work for Ticketmaster, the ticketing company, and people would always come and say, how do I get tickets to a concert? And 99% of the time, the answer was go to the website and buy them. What they really wanted was free tickets. So 99% of your answers today may be go to the VA website and get your information. But we're looking for that 1% that might be helpful. In general, are we as former military all entitled to some VA benefit? Is that generally true?
Absolutely. The one caveat to that is the discharge quality, the discharge status, and the honorable discharge. Having served, the 4 or 5 year commitment that we had, more than likely we are eligible.
Great. So if you had an honorable discharge with 5 years of service, are able to access VA care of some sort. Okay, great.
Right. So the VA, as you said, I used to call them Veteran Administration too, but the Department of Veterans Affairs has 3 administrations under it. Mm-hmm. The NCA, the National Cemetery Administration. Many of us would be eligible for burial or cremation within the NCA. And then the VBA, the Veterans Business Administration, handles things like VA loans. Mm-hmm. So things associated with money, I think of as the VBA. And then what I normally think about the VA is the VHA, the Veterans Health Administration. And that's the network of hundreds of hospitals and facilities, not only hospitals, but clinical-based outreach centers across the country for healthcare. Yeah.
We have some relationship with all 3 as honorably discharged.
That's correct.
Assuming we were honorably discharged. Yep. So when you go online to look up things on YouTube, everyone is screaming into the camera about disability. Talk about the difference between being eligible for VA care and then how disability works.
Find your local VA, give them a call, ask for the eligibility specialist, bring in your DD-214, and then they'll walk you through all the things you're eligible for. So just keep that in the back of your mind. But yeah, eligibility and disability are 2 different areas. So you may be eligible for VHA care, but you may have a 0% disability. And so what that really means, and the other thing to keep in mind, if you're watching this before November, really suggest you make that first call to VA ASAP, because a lot of policies change as the VA is a member of the executive branch. So when the administration changes, good, bad, ugly, whatever, I have no political opinion about it, but just know that policies that were active during one administration may be changed in the next administration. So, for example, means testing is a really key one for a lot of us, because if if your DD-214 and most recent tax returns show that your financial means are above a certain threshold, you may not be eligible, period. And again, check on that. Or if you are eligible for VHA care, you may pay a copay. So that's changed over the years. At one point, if you means test outed, you weren't eligible, in my understanding, you weren't eligible for anything. But most recently, I've heard that if you pass the means test, you can still be eligible for care, but you would pay out of pocket a portion of it, like a lot of medical insurance works anyway. So, and then disability is a separate process. So most recently, the VA announced the PACT Act. That's one that may be really relevant to a lot of our classmates because it's to address primarily burn pits, soldiers who served in the Middle East when burn pits and other toxins were pretty much part of life. The VA has recognized that, and they've created an act, an official policy to address that. It's called your local VA. Say, help bring my DD-214 down. I just want you to know that I think I'm eligible under the PACT Act. Yep. And then that will start a different process that's really important. And then this ties into disability. So first off, I, like many of us, got out of the military, got out of the Army, had no clue about the VA because I didn't consider myself to be wounded. I thought I had, pretty peaceful existence, all things, considered. So I had it in my head that unless I was wounded, don't even go to the VA. And so I didn't even think about it. And maybe I didn't pay attention when I, ETS, I don't know. But I don't remember clearly knowing that I was eligible to go to the VA, period.
Right.
And then someone told me, so I went and I checked, and sure enough, I was eligible, and I was shocked. And then there's this. So the other thing is that disabilities, I've often associated with, you'll hear some people say, hey, I'm a 100% disabled veteran, or 10% disabled veteran, or 50% disabled veteran. And I work with them, and I go, man, I don't really get it because you seem to be fully functioning. I don't understand what that percentage means. And so the VA governs this disability process. They work with a lot of third parties, or what you know as veteran service offices like DAV or the American Legion, or a lot of these non-federal entities to assist veterans in determining if they have a disability that the VA would recognize that maybe the veteran doesn't know about. So another really good resource is to go to your local DAV chapter and just say, hey, I would just like to know if there's any disabilities that I might qualify for. And the nice thing, it's not nice. I mean, if we have disabilities, that means our life has been impaired somehow because of our military service. They call it a service-connected disability. It's officially. So what they do is they try to determine if something happened during your service, like serving in the Middle East when toxins were a big part of your daily life, then maybe that has an impact on the quality of your life today. And so the disability, my understanding is that it's set up to recognize that possibility, to investigate if there's actually factual basis for it. And if there is, then to determine how the government can compensate you for that decrease in the quality of your life. I talked to a lot of folks. I used to be in the same camp where it's like, wait a minute, somebody else has got it worse than me. There's only a limited number of taxpayer dollars. I'm lucky. I'm not going to go talk about disability. It doesn't apply. And I respect you all out there who feel that way. And I felt that way for a long time until recently. My wife kept hitting me over the head. Why can't you hear me? Why can't you hear me? And I'm like, I don't know. Well, why don't you get your hearing checked? Sure enough, I was enrolled in the VHA. I got my hearing checked, and they're like, yeah, you got a hearing problem. And can you tell us about your military experience? And I told them, forthrightly about where I served and what I did. And they came back and said, yeah, you have a hearing disability. And hearing loss is one of the biggest disabilities that VA recognizes. One of the, percentage of veterans that have hearing loss is pretty high.
This is a great example where it starts to get complicated. Let's try to peel it apart for those of us who are class 86, 60 years old, with a variety of healthcare options.
Yep.
Work for companies that give us healthcare. You've got the exchange, et cetera. So let's say I'm going to make up a silly example just for a discussion. Let's say I have a gammy elbow. I just made that up, right? So it seems to be two dimensions. Now, I want you to correct me on this. One dimension is because I served for 5 years, I have an honorable discharge. I've served in Desert Storm, and because of the PACT Act, I can go to a VA doctor and have my gammy elbow looked at. If I make a lot of money, I'll have to pay more on the copay to fix my gammy elbow. Or if I don't make any money, then I don't have to pay as much. That's the means testing.
As long as you make that initial threshold of eligibility based upon primarily your service and the condition
So a really
of your discharge.
important thing is that I'm understanding is you go determine your level of eligibility, period. That's
most important thing, period.
One. And that because
once
you are eligible, you can find some sort of remedy. Though it may be at a higher price, it may be at a response time, but there is medical care somewhere in the system, whether it's a local referral or whatever.
And worst case, Paul, you go tomorrow, they say, sorry, Paul, you're not eligible for whatever reason. Take your paperwork, put it back in your file, and come back in December and ask again. Because again, the administration...
I guess the most powerful example, Barry, is that when we got out, they told us, don't even go near the VA. You guys are fly people. You're out. You're done. Go away. And then that's changed over time. The policy changed. And so the reason all these YouTube videos are all screaming about different things is that they're trying to track the policy changes. It's almost like being an accountant tracking tax code, right? You're trying to track all these policy changes.
I think that's a good analogy, Paul. Yeah.
Okay. So
kind of like that.
So if you're eligible, you can find healthcare in the VA. Okay. Now the other side is, how does disability?
Number one, at one point there was 9 different levels of copays within the VHA eligibility. So if you're eligible, you'd be assigned to one of these 9. And level 1 was if you were what they consider 100% service connected disabled. And it was basically, you don't pay any copays. And then at level 9, you have zero service connection, but you're still eligible. Then you pay copays, and there are a lot of other things that happen. And so there's a spectrum from 0 to 9 based upon primarily not your eligibility, but your service connected disability level.
Right.
And so there's a difference in how much you would pay out of pocket each time you go to the VA based upon your service connected disability percentage. So 100%.
But the cutoff point is eligibility. You're either eligible or you're not. Okay, got it. Great.
Right.
The eligibility is key. And then within that is finding that whatever the rate of the disability is, which is based on more exploration. VSOs and having people help you with your disability level. You want to talk about that?
Sometimes we don't advocate for ourselves for whatever reason. We may feel ashamed. We may feel guilty. We may feel we don't deserve it. We may feel, hey, somebody else served more than I did and they deserve it. Whatever the reason, we may not advocate for ourselves. We may shortchange us on things that we're eligible for that we rule ourselves out for. The nation has identified that your military service may have affected you in ways you don't even know. And so I encourage you to check it out. And the DAV is I think of as the specialist in all these types of disability issues. And so their services are free. They're a nonprofit. So in addition to looking up your local VA, look up your local chapter of the DAV and say, hey, I served. Here's my situation. I'd just like to know if you can help me determine if there's either benefits or VSO, I think means either Veteran Service Officer, who's an employee of that group, or VSO can mean the organization such as DAV. So VSO can mean, I think, means both.
So a VSO is not a government employee. They do not work for the Veterans.
That's my understanding. My understanding is that DAV is an entity. It's a nonprofit that is dedicated to advocacy for veterans in the country, period. Okay. And so they don't have, I don't think they have any association with the federal government, and their employees are not federal government employees. They're employed by this nonprofit known as DAV.
Now, an interesting thing that I learned in discussions with Sue Irons, who is our AOG Veteran Services liaison, is that VSOs all vary in quality, and you can choose your VSO. So a VSO is like an advocate, and going back to the tax analogy, a VSO would be like a tax accountant. that advocates for you with the IRS. A VSO
That's
advocates
great.
for you with the VA. So if you don't like your VSO, change them.
DAV, in my experience, check it out for yourself. I've never paid them for services. Okay. And I don't know how the other veteran advocates that are known as nonprofits like the American Legion or VFW, I don't know exactly. I found the DAV. I have a good working relationship with the DAV, and I'm like, they work for me. So I've gone to the DAV. I encourage you to find your local VSO that works for you. Now, in addition to VSOs, within this whole disability landscape, you should know that there's other groups that are not VSOs that are disability experts. Okay. You pay them to advocate for you. Okay. And I discovered one. He was great. I worked with him for a while. I thought he was, and I gave him permission to look up my records and to advocate for me and everything. We got down the line and it was like, okay, so here's the payment schedule and here's what you'll owe me if this happens or what you'll owe me. And I said, wait a minute. And maybe I was naive, but I was like, wait, so you're a for-profit? He goes, yeah, I don't do this for free. It's like, I get it. That's cool. But there's another group that does the same thing you're doing that won't charge me anything. Why am I working with you? And it's like, well, because I'll advocate for you better than they will.
See, this
or whatever. So
super complicated.
Yep.
If you don't have a good friend like Barry Peterson, because it was really
learn the hard way, Paul.
That a lot of this came out, and that I was able to ask Sue Irons about. So a VSO can be working for associated with the DAV, Disabled American Veterans, the American Legion. There's Scott Womack is trying to become a VSO through the American Legion. I don't want to speak for him, and we'll have
beautiful
on again. But
there's a great example.
Yeah.
So I think when you say VSO, that's known as basically volunteers, or nonprofits. But there's other, I think they call registered advocates. There's another official term we should look up. And those are people who love veterans, it's their profession. And they've set up their own company to do this. Yep. And you can pay them. And maybe they advocate better than somebody else. I mean, that's.
Well, I don't want to speculate.
I don't think they're called VSOs, though.
But if you think about a very large claim for a really serious issue, then maybe someone who's paid might be to your preference.
Exactly. Or what I've heard is the VA doesn't, the VA may say, hey, I appreciate your submission, but you're a 0%. Nothing here qualifies. And you may say, hey, wait a minute. I need to push back on that. At that point, I've heard people would say, I'm going to find a registered advocate or whatever that term is for the non-VSO and say, hey, VA, I'm appealing your decision. I want to come back and I'm going to have someone that is maybe an expert in appeals. So maybe that's the key difference.
In which case, they're all specialists to help. And I think we'll probably just leave it there because I think this is a great primer to just get people started. If you take anything away from this discussion and the incredibly helpful insight that Barry's helped us with, it's that we're all potentially eligible and much more than we thought we were because we served our 5 years. And if you got your honorable discharge, you're potentially eligible. Find out if you're eligible. Jack Callahan, who's one classmate, he's actually a doctor inside VA, has made mention to me. I'm going to have him back on in a similar format. He said that he mentioned to me that the co-pays are much better and much more advantageous than civilian programs. So it's worth your time to check if you're eligible. If you are eligible, you can then go with the Disabled American Veterans or your local VSO organization like the American Legion if you don't want to pay, and they can advocate on your behalf to find your disability. If your disability, since many of us served in Desert Storm, the disability is probably more available than everybody thinks. And it's a path that's available to all of us if we just take it. And I'm kind of evangelical about it because my wife was really pushing me. And I had that old 30-year-old, we can't. And I gave them my DD-214. It had my service in Desert Storm. The eligibility officer brought me without question, and I have an appointment on the 12th for a checkup. Like from 0 to 60.
Yeah.
And what I did is I went into the VA. So if you go into a VA, they'll walk you through it. So at the end of the day, don't read stuff online because it's incredibly confusing. Go talk to the eligibility officer to start with.
Right.
And at least get you started on it. Particularly if you're 60, you're retiring, Medicare doesn't come on,
Right.
and you don't want to stroke those huge checks
Right.
for private care.
Hey, Paul, just one other thing. I'm so happy you told us about your experience. And one thing that just jumps out at me, I just have to reinforce. I used to have a negative view of the VA. I just was like, they're bureaucratic and all this stuff. And I got to tell you, you said the term I heard you say is handhold. That has been my experience. As I've been with the VA, the people really care. They serve because they love veterans. They want to help veterans. And when you go into that eligibility office, I am confident you're going to find somebody who really wants to help you, really wants to give you accurate information, and will hold your hand to make sure you get to the right person. So I've erased my whole, thoughts about what the VA stands for. And as a matter of fact, I wasn't working at the VA. I was living in Reno. I got super sick. I was getting my care at the VA. I got super sick, and I got hospitalized at the VA hospital. And my care was so good that my family was like, Barry, why are you not working here? This place is great. And I'm like, I lived here for 20 years and I never thought about working at the VA. So I really, I love the VA. I can't speak highly enough about it. That really, my experience, dedicated, good people who want you to live the best quality life you can.
It's great. I would go work at the VA as a greeter, but I'm introverted, so I'm going to stick to podcasting.
You're introverted.
Barry, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And maybe we'll have you back on for more updates as we go, but this has been super helpful.
Thanks, Paul.